The goal of environmental education is to develop a world population that is aware of and concerned about the total environment and its associated problems, and they must have the knowledge, attitude, skill, motivation, and commitment to work individually and collectively towards solution of current problems and the prevention of new ones. The goal of environmental education is to develop a world population that is aware of and concerned about the total environment and its associated problems, and they must have the knowledge, attitude, skill, motivation, and commitment to work individually and collectively towards solution of current problems and the prevention of new ones.
Good evening, sir. Thank you for joining us, sir. You're welcome, sir.
Thank you, sir. I'm with you, sir.
Yes, sir. We'll wait for 5 minutes. The general introduction will start by 5. We'll wait 7 minutes for people to join. After that, the moderator will take over, read your citation, and the lecture will commence.
Very well, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. Good evening, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to today's edition of Continuous Development Program for Environmental Professionals. My name is Lasisi Adedoyin. I welcome you all to this edition. Today, we'll be talking about a topic that is crucial to human development, environmental policy. You know, policy is something that is very, very good. It helps us to fine-tune how human activities goes around within the environment. Policy development is crucial to both regulation and environmental law. And today we have with us a seasoned professional, a director who has seen everything both in academics and in professional life. I enjoin each and every one of us to be attentive. Join us. Let me welcome you once and again. Thank you for joining us. This is Lasisi Adedoyin on behalf of ECO Environmental. Thank you.
The goal of environmental education is to develop a world population that is aware of and concerned about the total environment and its associated problems. And they must have the knowledge, attitude, skill, motivation, and commitment to work individually and collectively towards solution of current problems and the prevention of new ones. The goal of environmental education is to develop a world population that is aware of and concerned about the total environment and its associated problems. And they must have the knowledge, attitude, skill, motivation, and commitment to work individually and collectively towards solution of current problems and the prevention of new ones.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are delighted to have you on today's session on Continuous Professional Development Program for Professionals in Environmental Sector. Continuous Professional Development Program for Professionals in the Environment Sector is created to offer lifelong learning opportunities for environmental professionals. The field of environmental science is constantly evolving with new regulations, technologies, and scientific discoveries emerging rapidly. Hence, professionals must continually update their knowledge to remain effective in addressing complex environmental challenges. The goal of environmental education is to develop a world population that is aware of and concerned about the environment and its associated problems, and which has the knowledge, skills, attitude, motivations, and commitment to work individually and collectively towards solution of current problems and the prevention of new ones. Continuous Professional Development Program for Professionals in the Environment Sector is a knowledge-based product from ECO Envirotalk with the aim of developing a credit-based program for the development of professionals in the environment sector. I am Fatima Ogundimo. I am an environmental and climate advocate, passionate about the long-term sustainability of our planet. Please introduce yourself in the chat box. We are looking forward to meeting everybody on this call. And let us all maintain decorum throughout the duration of this session. Without further ado, I'll be introducing our guest speaker for today, who is Mr. Sojino Olasukomi. And the topic we'll be taking today is Emerging Realities in Environmental Policy Formation, Implementation, and Evaluation. Mr. Sojino Olasukomi Sewanu is an environmental scientist with over 2 decades of experience in environmental management. His expertise includes conducting environmental studies, developing and implementing environmental and social safeguards, regulatory compliance, monitoring waste or wastewater management and circular economy, and human capital development on environmental and social safeguard issue. As a safeguard expert, he has been involved in the development, review, and implementation of safeguard instruments such as ESIA, ESMF, RAP, and ESMP for several projects cutting across various sectors of the economy, including projects funded by the World Bank, IFC, AFDB, amongst others. Currently, he is the director in charge of environmental assessment in the Lagos State Ministry of Environment and Water Resources. He holds a first degree in biochemistry from Lagos State University, a Master of Science degree in chemistry from the University of Ibadan, and a doctorate degree in analytical chemistry from the Federal University of Agriculture, Abeokuta. He is a member of several professional bodies, including the Nigerian Environmental Society, the Chemical Society of Nigeria, Institute of Chartered Chemists of Nigeria, Institute of Safety Professionals of Nigeria, and the current chairman of the Science Association of Nigeria, Lagos State Public Service Chapter. Please, let's give Mr. Sojino a warm welcome using the chat emoji. You have the floor, Mr. Sojino.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Thank you, EcoEnviron, for having me this wonderful evening. It's a pleasure to be here to share a little that I have seen. Mr. Lasisi in his introduction said I've seen everything in academics, and I'm not sure I've seen everything. I've seen a little, and I look forward to seeing more. I will be sharing with us today the little I have seen, so that we can all together also rub minds on way forward. Permit me to share my slide.
Yes, please, sir.
Well, I'm not, can you see my slide?
Yeah, yes,
Yes,
but you
we
can
can.
help us make it better by put it in the slide mode.
That's what I'm trying to do. Doesn't seem like I'm getting that. Okay.
You can click, no, just click on it. Just double click, sir.
Okay. I'm sure you can see my slide now.
Very well, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Okay. So let me start by extending my sincere appreciation to EcoEnviron Talk for having me on this call this evening. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Like the moderator have said, my name is Sojino Olasukomi. I will be talking to us on emerging realities in environmental policy formulation, implementation, and evaluation. Like we all know, the environment is a very dynamic sector, and as such, environmental management is also dynamic. Sincerely, some of the approaches that worked yesterday, some few years back, are probably now obsolete and are no longer finding relevance. And so, as such, environmental managers need to begin to become creative and become abreast with emerging issues. So this is just the outline, a brief introduction. I'll try to define some key terms. We'll look at the evolution of environmental policy from the days of little or no civilization to the current state that we find ourselves. We'll look at what are policy instruments, particularly the ones that are adopted in environmental policy formulation. We'll look at some emerging realities. I'll probably draw a few conclusions. Like I said before, the earth, of course, is the home of every man. And as of today, science has not found a second home yet for man. There are a lot of research work going on, a lot of space science activities going on to see whether we can find a second planet that will support existence of man and other living things like the earth does. But we haven't found one yet. And so the earth still remains the home of man. And so if the earth remains the home of man, it is just good to say that humans have moral obligation to therefore protect their home. It's just like you come to my house. I can regulate what you do in my house, where you put your shoes, whether you can walk into my living room with your shoes or not. Because you are in my house, I have a right to determine what you do in my house, protect my house. So the planet Earth is the home of man. And so man has a moral obligation to protect the planet. And some of the instruments that man has devised in protecting the planet is the instrument of policies. Someone has asked me before, is policy a law? And my response is that no, policy is not a law, but laws are policies. So there are several policy instruments. A policy may not be enforceable, because it has not become a law. But when a law comes into existence, it's also a policy direction of how a government wants certain activities to be done. And so one of those instruments that is used in protecting the planet Earth, and indeed the environment, because the environment is a component of this Earth, is the instrument of policies. And so let's try to define a few terms. What exactly is a policy? An individual can have a policy. I've had people use the statement, it's my personal, that's my policy. That statement or that phrase seems to be common, particularly when people do certain things and you try to challenge them. They said, I'm a very principled man and my policy is that you don't do this. What the fellow is saying in essence is that is my rule, those are my rules, my principles and my guidelines, the guidelines I've set for myself. In homes, for instance, parents have some policies in homes. Growing up, I found my dad having some, what you can call policies that if you violate, you can be sure of a few strokes of the cane. So you can have people having such policies to guide their private lives or to guide their activities. So what exactly is a policy is a system, a deliberate, a system you deliberately put in place that contains certain principles or guidelines that are designed, to actually influence or determine your actions. It can be within an organization. It could also be within a government, enterprise or a government body. Now, so you could have you having private policies, they apply to specific issues, and this could apply to private organizations. For instance, environmental policies that address environmental issues. Some organizations have their financial policies as to how money can be released and how money can be disbursed, how money that is expended has to be retired. Organizations have such policies. Those are policies that are specific to certain issues within the organization. And I could remember that even on this eco-environment platform, I have spoken about public policy before, and public policy is just a set of guidelines or principles that a government organization, a government body has adopted, to address some social issues, some social challenges, and to promote public good. For instance, the government could say, okay, we know Lagos State, for instance, some time ago, had a policy of you not riding motorbikes on certain roads and on certain bridges, certain areas in the state. They were restricted. So there was a restriction policy at that time, and I think it's still standing on people on what you call Okada, popular Okada riders not riding on certain roads within the state. This is a public policy that is adopted by government to address a particular social issue, a particular social problem, and to promote public good. So environmental policy could be looked at as either a private policy by an organization that speaks to how they intend to address environmental issues, or a public policy by a government body, a body set up by government to address certain environmental issues within the society and to promote, the good of everyone. So basically, environmental policies seeks to address certain environmental challenges, protect the environment, and of course, ensure that we properly manage natural resources. So let's deal with environmental policy and its evolution over the years. Long before some of us were born, societies have been regulating and protecting their environments, even though they didn't come under the bogus title of environmental policy. There have been the pre-20th century awareness, of environmental issues. In the European society at that time, there was a time, we're talking about the 20th century, where even though it didn't come under the bogus name of environmental policy, there were restrictions as to hunting. There were areas where there were restrictions as to who can hunt. So game as hunting activity at that time was restricted to royalties, to the royal class. And there were also the limit to which you can harvest, you can do timber harvesting. At that time, it was to preserve, the environment. And they were doing this at that time, but probably not looking at it as, an environmental policy. They were doing it just to protect, to ensure that, look, you preserve the environment. And then, of course, we had a challenge during the 18th to 19th century, where you have the issues of industrial revolution taking place, and there was serious environmental degradation. At that time, that led to certain decisions being taken by societies at that time. At that time, policy issues have not been globalized. We have not had global policy directions that we have today. And then in the mid-20th century, of course, there were some landmark events that took place. We were having oil spills, air pollution issues were becoming serious, and some of these activities, including the use of pesticides, were beginning to trigger public concerns. And at that time, societies like the United States of America, countries like the US began to look into how to protect the environment very critically. And of course, that led to the Clean Water and Clean Air Acts, both of 1972 and 1963, that was put together by the United States of America. It also led to the US establishing the US EPA in 1970. And of course, from there, it led to us having international treaties like the Ramsar Convention of 1971. These issues began to get international recognition gradually. And then, of course, we got into the era of global environmental policy, where environmental policies become an issue that were being addressed at the global level. So in the 1980s and 1990s, environmental issues became what is being addressed at the global level, because we know that pollution and some environmental challenges do not respect boundaries. Air pollution, for instance, does not respect boundaries. And so because there were issues of transboundary pollution and all the rest, it became a global concern. And so environmental policy issues became a global issue at that time. And of course, we were beginning to recognize climate change issues, biodiversity loss issues, and transboundary pollution issues. And of course, in 1987, we had the Brundtland Report, which introduced the concept of sustainable development. All of these were in an attempt to protect the environment. These were policy instruments that were gradually coming upstream because it was beginning to receive global recognition. And of course, you will recall the Montreal Protocol of 1987, which was set up to address ozone layer, the use of ozone layer depleting substances. So we have these issues becoming a global issue at this time. So we have a situation where you find societies regulating the environment gradually, but not on the global level, and then we transit from a country-based regulations to global issues. At this point, as we speak today, we are in the 20s, and environmental policies have become global issue. And what is on the front burner now has to do with climate change and sustainable development. By the time we got into the year 2000, we were talking about the Millennium Development Goals, which ran from year 2000 to 2015. And then, of course, as we move from the SDGs in 2015, the MDGs in 2015, we got into the SDGs in 2015 to 2030. And so you see environmental issues now full scale on the global level. But this started as initiatives at society level, and then it gradually evolved to become a global issue. And as we speak today, it's still evolving. It's still evolving. There are still emerging issues, which are some of the things we are going to look at in the course of this discussion. There are still emerging issues. Climate change had taken over the front burner now, but it's not stopping there. SDGs are in the front burner now, but it's not stopping there. Man is evolving ideas to protect the environment from day to day. And we are getting to, find more innovative ways to address environmental challenges. And these are policy instruments. Some go into not just mere regulations, some are becoming laws, and all of these are policy directions that are meant to protect the environment. Let's look at a few environmental policy instruments. What are environmental policy instruments, really? They are just tools or mechanisms that are adopted either by government or organizations to just influence environmental behavior and achieve the set environmental objectives. So these policy instruments are meant, they are what you can call mechanisms put in place by either government or an organization to influence how humans interact with their environment, how my activity impact on the environment, how I interact with my environment. These are basic tools that have been put in place to ensure that I interact with my environment in a positive manner. My activities are not endangering the environment in such a way that I am making the environment, not conducive for either the present generation or even for generations yet unborn. Some of these instruments are, one, regulatory instruments, what we call the command and control. And for those of us in public sector, government establishments, we are used to this. We are used to laws. We are used to laws. The Environmental Management and Protection Law 2017 of Lagos State, the Environmental Impact Assessment Act. We are just used to laws. And these are instruments, they are regulatory instruments really, that have been adopted by government or developed by government to regulate how my activities interact with the environment. These include standards, acceptable limits, guidelines, regulations that have been set by government to ensure that my behavior, my interaction with the environment does not negatively impact on the environment. I said an example here. You can have emission standards for vehicles, vehicular emission standards. You can have noise level standards. For instance, the noise level for occupational health exposure in an industrial facility for 8 hours is about 90 decibel. Some persons set that standards just to regulate the kind of noise that I'm exposed to if I'm an industrial setting. You can also have, bans. People, for instance, Lagos State chose to ban styrofoams some few months ago. Styrofoams and SUPs some few months ago. These are regulatory policies that are designed to ensure to achieve some set environmental objectives. That is an example of an environmental policy instrument. Another one is economic instruments. You can actually use economic instruments to achieve environmental objectives. For instance, imposition of carbon taxes on industries, facilities, where the idea is to ensure that you make them reduce their carbon emissions because you are imposing a tax on them. So you are finding a way to make them behave in a manner, in an environmentally friendly manner, such that you are reducing the kind of emissions that comes from their processes or their activities. You can, I'm sure some of us will attest, if you have gone to the shopping mall recently, that you may have to pay heavily for your carrier bag now. Not in those days when you get to ShopRite, for instance, and then you buy a few things, they give you 2 nylons, and you have to, and you use that, you throw it somewhere, it becomes a plastic waste in our environment. Now, when you are going to shopping mall, you probably go with your carrier bag, or you pay heavily for one there. These are economic instruments being used to influence human behavior in such a manner that the human behavior is positive towards the environment. So if you pay 500 naira, for instance, for a carrier bag or more than that, you won't want to throw it anywhere. You just protect it, because when next you are going back to the mall, you have to pick it again. You could also have the instruments like grants for maybe emission reduction are being given. Grants for adopting clean development mechanisms are being given. So when you have such instrument being used, it is to influence the environmental behavior of an organization, all in a bid to protect the environment. So this is different from where you use regulatory instrument like laws. This one is you are incentivizing, that activity such that the person is because of the financial burden or financial gain, is behaving in an environmentally friendly manner. We talk about talking about the deposit refund system, where you can, of course, for instance, we want to manage PET bottles in Lagos, and we say, okay, Coca-Cola, for instance, we say, okay, for every Coca-Cola bottle you return to the dealer or to a retailer, you get a 10 naira refund, or you get a 10 naira worth voucher, or a 20 naira worth voucher. And so that, because there is a financial benefit attached to it, the fellow who just took a bottle of Coca-Cola will not want to throw the bottle into our drains. So these are economic instruments being used to influence human behavior. Another instrument is the voluntary instrument, where organizations are encouraged to voluntarily take some initiatives that will ensure the protection of the environment. This is also a policy instrument where you can say, okay, for planting 100 trees, I'm just giving an example, for planting 100 trees or 1,000 trees this year, we are giving you a tax rebate. That is, you are using an economic instrument to propel a voluntary action from someone or an organization. So we find a situation where organizations are now voluntarily on their own trying to do certain things to protect the environment. For instance, switching from the use of fossil fuel, transiting from the use of fossil fuel source of energy to renewable energy sources. That, of course, will be encouraged by any government, because if you voluntarily do that, you are showing you are trying to show us that you are responsible when it comes to environmental stewardship. You are trying to move from what is, impacting on the environment, and of course, trying to behave in an environmental friendly manner. So you have this policy instrument influencing environmental behavior. You can have information-based instruments where you are trying to influence an individual or organizational behavior with the use of information. In certain clients, eco-labeling is compulsory. In fact, some people will not buy your product if you do not eco-label. Eco-labeling is just to show how environmental friendly your practices and your product is. And so eco-labeling, for instance, is one of such information-based instruments that is being used. It's a policy instrument. It's an environmental policy instrument. We have environmental reporting, where, for instance, you ask someone to do an audit. You have an environmental audit done of your facility. That's environmental reporting, telling us how your activity is impinging on the environment. And of course, the public disclosure of such instruments or such report is also a way of influencing individuals or organizations to behave in an environmentally friendly manner. For instance, if you carry out a compliance monitoring or audit to a facility, and the facility is aware that there will be a public disclosure of the findings, they won't want to do anything that will, of course, give them a negative public image when it comes to environmental stewardship. So these are some of the instruments. Of course, environmental education. I believe that people do certain things because they do not know the consequences. And if they get to know the consequences of what they do, the likelihood is that they may not want to do such things again. And so environmental education and awareness creation is another policy instrument that can be used to influence human behavior. So these are some of the policy instruments that can be used, to influence human behavior when it comes to environmental protection. I've discussed this some time ago, And just to, for the sake of this particular session, we'll look at it briefly. Environmental policy formulation process, like any other public policy, and I'm looking at this now from the angle of a public policy, like any other public policy, because public policies are meant to address societal ills, societal challenges. So environmental policy that is a public policy is meant to address an environmental problem within the society. So the first step in that policy formulation is identifying the problem. What exactly is the problem that this environmental policy is meant to address? And I give an example. The plastic waste management policy is an environmental policy. And so what problem is it meant to address? There is plastic pollution. Drains, our drains are being filled up with plastic, particularly single-use plastic and styrofoams. Government is expending several millions of naira yearly to desilt and to cut away these plastic products. Some of these plastic products are washed into, find their way into our water system, our water bodies, into our aquatic ecosystem, the rivers, the lagoons, find their way there. And some of them are consumed as macroplastics by fishes. So they become a public health concern because we consume these fishes and we maybe consume microplastics. So because of public health concerns and because of the economic cost of continuing to cut away plastics, single-use plastics from the environment, and because these single-use plastics block drainage channels, resulting in flooding. So we have found a 3-in-1 problem that is being caused by this plastic pollution. So we have identified the problem. The problem is single-use plastics, styrofoams are constituting serious environmental and public health hazard. So what next do we do? The next thing is, what do we have to do? We need to do a need assessment. What should be done? What do we have to do? Do we stop outrightly the production of plastic? Should we ban the importation? Should we ban, what exactly should we do? Okay, we must find a way to manage these plastics in such a way that they're no longer constituting nuisance, constituting an environmental problem. So we will now need to set our goals, decide on what we want to achieve with the policy that we have in mind. So the next stage is to move to the policy drafting stage. In the course of the policy drafting, so many activities take place. Number one is stakeholders consultation. We need to first do a very broad stakeholder mapping. We need to map out who are the key stakeholders. So stakeholders mapping is a crucial step in policy formulation. We need to map out who are the stakeholders, both public and private sector stakeholders. So we map out the stakeholders, we consult them to obtain their input. Meanwhile, the process of drafting will involve a lot of desktop studies of likely or similar policies in other climes if they exist. And so you look at what exists in certain other climes and what is possible within the climate, within this climate where you are. And then, of course, you come up with policy directions that will achieve the set goals while consulting with stakeholders to get their inputs and to get their buy-in I emphasize stakeholders' engagement or consultation because people tend to agree more with what they are part of. People tend to comply more with a process that carries them along. They tend to see that process as theirs. They tend to own that process than when everything is done and it's just thrown down their throat. And so in policy formulation, we must avoid the command and control approach. We must embrace engagement and consultation if we are going to have a policy that will achieve the set objective. And of course, when the policy has been drafted, there is need for ratification of the policy by top echelon of the management of that organization, or the ministry or MDA of government, or the state government executive council in the case of a state, for instance. And then of course, there will be a public disclosure of that policy that have been formulated. Well, let's look at basic fundamentals of any good environmental policy. You want to look at an environmental policy from the glasses, from the eye of a public policy. And any public policy, one of the measures for a good public policy is its effectiveness. In other words, is this environmental policy achieving the set goals? Is it achieving the set goal? Is the ban on styrofoam, for instance, achieving the set objective by Lagos State government? Is the Lagos State government pleased with the results they have seen so far? If it is not achieving the set goal, then that speaks to the effectiveness of that policy implementation. And if it is not, what then do we have to do? So that is one measure. So any sound environmental policy must be effective, must have effectiveness as a core objective of implementation. That's one. Is it cost effective? Are we not losing more in while trying to achieve this, the objective of this policy? Is it cost effective? If we do a cost benefit analysis, both economic benefit, social benefit, and the environmental benefits of that policy, and I'm still speaking to the ban of styrofoam, for instance, is it cost effective? Is it cost effective? Are we getting the best we can get? Socially, economically, and environmentally, if we do a cost-benefit analysis of it, is it cost effective? Is it worth the journey? Does that policy worth all the journey? Does it worth all the stress that the people probably have passed through? People who have styrofoam and not dress. So these are just rhetoric questions that one need to ask as you look at the policy. The other thing about environmental policy is equity. Now, one of the emerging issues in policy formulation, environmental policy formulation, is what we call environmental justice and equity. We're going to talk about that later. Environmental justice and equity. So, does this policy share the burden and the benefits equally? Or does it just put the burden on the lower cadre of the society and give the benefits to the people, the elite or the well-to-do? So these are some of the things that you look at in policy, in a good environmental policy. Transparency is another instrument you look at. Adaptability, and then stakeholders engagement. Where stakeholders truly engaged. Then another key thing about that policy, a good environmental policy, is sustainability. Can we promote a long-term sustainability, economically, socially? Is it sustainable over time? Then any good environmental policy must be evidence-based. You don't come up with a policy because you think. You come up with a policy because you have your facts. The world has moved. I don't know where Nigeria is, where our climate is, but I believe also we have also moved. The world has moved from we think to we know, where you now determine or you design policies based on facts and figures. We now live in a data-driven world. We live in a data-driven world where people speak with figures, with facts. And so in making policies, we must also work on getting the facts before we just jump into formulating policies. And of course, these policies must also have a very low unintended impact. For every policy, there are two consequences. Just like we were told in pharmacology or pharmacokinetics, when you're talking about drugs, they will tell you that every drug has two effects. There is the main effect, there's the side effect. Also in policy, there is what you call the main impact you want the policy to achieve. But there are always some unintended impacts that will come, what you can call side effects, that will come with that policy. And it is expected that that impact should be low in any good policy. If that unintended policy impact becomes so high, then there's a problem with that policy. I give you an example. The ban on styrofoam. The intention is not to run anybody is not to run anybody down financially. The intention is not to take people's livelihood. The intention is not to run anybody out of business, but somehow some people will be out of business. But somehow some people may have to look for something else to do. And so that is not the intention, but it will happen. So we need to now measure that unintended impact. How serious or significant is the impact? So these are some of the environmental policy. Now let's look at emerging realities in policy formulation. And this is where the core of the discussion this evening. Emerging realities. What are the emerging realities when it comes to policy, environmental policy formulation, implementation, and evaluation? What are the emerging realities that we have to deal with? Number one is that climate change, as at now, has become a central driving force in policies formulation globally. And in formulating any policy, climate change factors must be considered. Organizations must carefully consider climate change issues in their company environmental policies. The days of just writing an environmental policy that does not take cognizance of climate change, the contribution of your organization to climate change issues, or does not take cognizance of climate change adaptation and mitigation issues are over. Climate change, as of today, is in the driver's seat on policy matters globally. And we must, either as individuals or as government organizations, have that at the back of our mind, that climate change issues have become critical and we must pay attention to them. Number two, Also, an emerging issue is the issue of circular economy and zero waste approach. Now, we cannot continue to be battling with waste collection, waste disposal, waste treatment forever. The world is moving from running here and there looking for money to buy trucks to be carrying waste from medians of roads and setbacks. The world is moving completely from battling with the challenge of illegal waste dumps here and there. As a matter of fact, the world is thinking about not having waste at all, where everything that should hitherto be a waste becomes a resource material, becomes a resource or becomes a raw material for another process. And so in thinking about environmental policy, either as an organization or as a government organization, we must begin to look at circularity. Circularity. We have done too many of linearity for too long. We must begin to look at circularity, and we must begin to look at the possibility of a complete zero waste approach. These are emerging realities in the world where we live in. And if we are going to be part of this world, we must be awake to these realities. We must be awake to these realities. Number two and number three is there is the rise of the blue and green economy. We are talking about green economy, sustainable use of the land resources. We are now talking about green buildings. These are realities confronting us. We are talking about blue economy, sustainable use of the marine ecosystem. These are the realities that we are confronted with, and these are emerging realities when it comes to policy formulation and development, and implementation. So we cannot pretend as if these things are not happening in the world where we live in. These are the realities, and we must be up and doing with respect to these realities. You cannot be talking about a building now that will be consuming so much of energy when the world is talking about energy-saving structures. We cannot be talking now about construction works that will leave so much of carbon footprint when the world is talking about green building. So these are the realities. Another one is technology and innovation. Permit me to tell you that we are in the era of artificial intelligence. And whether we like it or not, artificial intelligence is now part of environmental management processes. AI can now be used to do impact assessment. AI can now be used to do environmental monitoring. AI can now be used in carbon capturing. These are realities that we are faced with and that we must understand as policymakers or as organizations. We must begin to embrace them. We cannot afford to be left behind. We live in a world now that is almost completely technology driven, and our policies must look at that clearly. The days when we just do policies where everything is about one man going to monitor somewhere or one man going to shut down somewhere, those days are over. Now, we have realities facing us now, include market-based financial mechanisms. I spoke to us about carbon taxes. Many of us have heard about carbon markets. These are market-based financial mechanisms now, which we must wake up to. We must wake up to. These are the realities that we find before us. And so we can't afford not to be part of what is going on globally. These are current realities that we must all, be abreast of. Now, let's speak to the next one. There is increasing role of non-state actors in policy formulation now. The NGOs, non-governmental organizations, CBOs, community-based organizations. These individuals are now having increasing roles to play in formulation and implementation of policies. The days when maybe government will form a policy and shovel it down the throat of the people is over. We must begin to understand that non-state actors are also beginning to play critical roles in policy formulation. And that must be a reality that we are going to live with as we begin to look at policy direction to address other issues. We must have that in mind. Then there is a growing focus on environmental justice and equity. Environmental justice and equity. This is a serious issue. We must ensure that what is good for the goose is also good for the gander. And that in policy formulation, there must be no marginalization of vulnerable groups or vulnerable communities. The policy must share both benefits and burdens equally. So there is a growing focus on environmental justice and equity. And of course, the Rotarians have their 4 pillars. Check the 4 pillars of the Rotary Club. That speaks to justice and equity. And then we live in a world that has been VUCAized. Now, what do I mean by VUCA? We live in a volatile world, V for volatile, U for uncertain, C for complexity, and A for ambiguity. We live in a very VUCA world. Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. We live in a world where people don't even know what they want and what they actually need. There is uncertainty. There is complexity. To even understand human needs has become an issue. We live in a world now where to provide leadership is a bit difficult because you are leading a people who have issues with uncertainty. There is ambiguity around everybody. And so in a society where there is uncertainty and complexity, policymakers must be ready to address this uncertainty and complexity in policy formulation. We must be able to provide policy direction that will address environmental issues, even in this complex, uncertain, and very volatile society. I want to try and draw some conclusions as I close. Our world is dynamic, it's evolving, and is characterized by volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. That's the world we live in. We live in a VUCA world. You know, somebody was discussing with me that it appears that this Gen Z generation, they are a bit difficult to manage. And I said the Gen Z generation is a VUCA generation. They are very complex to understand. Some doesn't even know what they want. There are so many uncertainties around. And so to provide leadership in environmental management in a world like that, or to have sound environmental stewardship as an organization in a world like this, then you need to also be dynamic, innovative, and also be creative to be able to provide such direction in this VUCA world where we live in. On this note, I would like to say a very big thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. And thank you to EcoEnviron for having me. Good evening.
Thank you very, very much, sir, for the presentation. We are very appreciative. So we are now in the question and answer session. So please, if you have any question, please unmute your mic and introduce yourself and ask your question. Or you can leave it in the chat box. Thank you. Sir, there's a question in the chat box. It says, are state EPA stakeholders in EIA approvals? Did you get the question, sir?
Please take it again, ma'am.
Are state EPA stakeholders in EIA approvals?
Okay.
Yeah.
Will I answer that, or is that the only question?
Yeah, that's the only one so far, sir.
The fellow is asking, I don't know who asked, the fellow is asking if the State Environmental Protection Agency is a stakeholder in EIA approvals.
Yes, sir.
Correct. Well, EIA approval as of today in Lagos State, going by the circular of the head of service, is being done by the Ministry of the Environment. However, the review process is designed in such a way that key stakeholders are invited for the review meetings, depending on the type and nature of the project. Where you have an industrial facility, for instance, and permit me to also say that where you have an industrial facility, you obviously automatically invite the state EPA automatically, because the state EPA is responsible for industrial activities. Where you have structures, buildings, for instance, we have continually invited the responsible ministries, departments, or agencies. For instance, we have continually invited the Ministry of Physical Plan and Urban Development. We have continually invited the Lagos State Fire and Rescue Services. We have also invited severally the Lagos State Safety Commission, because these are key stakeholders when it comes to the process of reviewing those documents and issuing approvals. Now, so permit me to also say that for industrial facilities, we have also in recent time been given a directive to allow some of those industrial facilities activities go straight to the EPA, for the EI process entirely. And so these are some of the key stakeholders that are part of the EI process when it comes to approval.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. We have another question from Adegboyega Lawal, a colleague with Federal Ministry of Environment. His question is, how do we ensure effective collaboration between environmental regulators in federal, state, and local government, as well as civil society, to ensure effective policy formulation and implementation? How do we ensure effective collaboration between all the state actors, federal, state, and local government, and civil society to ensure effective policy formulation and implementation? Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. A fantastic question. And that can only come, of course, from a regulator. Thank you very much, Mr. Adegboyega. Well, I have said it in the course of the discussion that there's a need for stakeholders' engagement, even from the point of formulation. From the point of formulation, because if people were carried along as stakeholders, the likelihood is that they will accept the policy, the compliance becomes easier. So either it's at the federal level or the state level or even at the local government level, at the point of formulating that policy, let's carry along all the stakeholders. And that is why the issue of stakeholder mapping is very important. We need to map out who are the key stakeholders to this policy, whether at the federal level or the state level, local government level, or even members of the public. For instance, there are certain policies that some artisans are key stakeholders. The market women are key stakeholders. You can't be doing plastic policy and you will not invite the food and beverage producers, pure water producers. These are key stakeholders. So we need to first do the mapping of the stakeholders and then invite them from the very beginning, so that makes it easier for collaboration. Once they are part of the process, collaboration becomes easier. People tend to be different when, after you have done the whole job and they feel that their interest was not captured, you are now asking them to come and collaborate. Of course, nobody will want to collaborate. They want to see that policy as their policy, not our policy. But once they are carried along, of course, they see it as our policy because they know that they were part of the process. I hope that answers Mr. Adegboyega's question.
Yeah, thank you very much. So another question, what are the measures taken by states to ensure that EIA is not evaded by anyone, no matter their class?
That's a serious question. Well, the measures, there are a lot of measures. One is regular surveillance and monitoring of projects or activities that requires EIA. That's one. Two is enforcement. Carry enforcement to ensure that people do what is right. Three is also that we also engage beyond using the command and control measure. We also engage. We do a lot of stakeholders engagement to create awareness on EIA. And that, of course, is having beneficial impact in the sense that it is we are seeing improvements in level of compliance. Now, when it comes to ensuring nobody evaded, no matter how high, you can only do so much by doing your job as a public servant, serve notices where possible. When you have approvals, do enforcement. That's the most. You know, so we can only do what is within the ambit, our processes that have been put in place. Regular surveillance and monitoring, ensure that you enforce compliance. Sometimes fine. That's the much that we can actually do.
Yeah. Thank you very much, sir. We have two other questions. These questions is together. The first one is, how can AI be utilized in EIA studies? And what are the emerging realities of the use of AI in environmental monitoring and environmental assessments? How can consultants in the field of environmental management position themselves to maintain relevance? So you can answer, and I will also add more to that, sir. Thank you.
Okay. There is a conference coming up. Is it April or May?
May, in Rome.
In Rome. So if you are an impact assessor, please avail yourself the opportunity to travel to Rome. We are hoping that one or two of us can go here from here. Is a conference of International Association of Impact Assessors. So the focus of that conference is actually on artificial intelligence. The role that artificial intelligence is playing in environmental assessment. Now, but to answer your question, we have seen these days where apps are being used to answer questions. You can just, on your phone now, you can talk to ChatGPT and it will give you some information. That's artificial intelligence. So there are certain impacts that you can predict by your experience on a project. For instance, if you bring a power plant project to me, without reading the EIA report, I can tell you what the likely impacts are without reading the EIA report. Obviously, you could say maybe experience over the years. The same thing, an AI can predict for you the likely impact of a project based on the components of the project, based on the activities that the project entails. And AI can predict that for you. So that is one role that AI plays. Now, it is a challenge, however, for environmental consultants to also be equipped. We are praying that AI will not send all of us out of job and out of market. But there are still things that AI cannot do as of today that you need a consultant to do. AI, for instance, will not go to take water sample. AI, for instance, will not take soil sample. AI, for instance, will not go on the lagoon to do hydrobiology, to check for the phyto and zooplanktons. AI will not do that. Even if AI is going to do anything at all, you have to take the sample and put it in an equipment before an AI can say something about it. So that is still a role for you, for an environmental consultant to still play. But the truth is that we are being challenged by technology, and we can either see technology as a friend or enemy. but we need to embrace technology as a friend, develop ourselves, our skills, to be able to match the emerging trend in the use of technology, so I will not be left behind. I leave the floor for you, Mr. Lasisi.
Okay, thank you very much. Basically, before the introduction of AI, there are tools that have been used, like Autodesk formats that you can use as a planning tools to help you to predict the likely impact of project. So, like like what Dr. just made mention, that AI is to enhance our work. So let's take example that you have a lot of set of data that are many. AI can help you in the prediction. It's just for you to design a code, an algorithm that will help you. So that is one. Two, data visualization. There are a lot of AI that you can use to create video. So if you're an environmental consultant, you want to talk to communities about a power plant or a project coming, you can use AI to do many videos that will enhance your interpretation of that project. We can see people making small documentaries without even leaving their house with AI. So also communication tools. In the past 1 week now, it's a war on Twitter when people try to fact check each and every other with Groku, a new fact checking app. So you can also use that. So AI will enhance our work, but how we develop ourselves using AI is one thing that is very, very important. That's just my take on that. I think we have some other questions. Okay, said the challenges being faced mostly in private organizations is the top management are always in support of emergence of environmental policy. How can an organization get the required support to carry out the intention of the policy? So top management having difficulty in key into environmental policy. So how can an organization get required support from the top management staff of the intention of the policy?
Okay, the first stage in having an environmental policy for your organization in the first place is just like the steps you take also in implementing an environmental management system, an EMS, for your company. There must be buy-in first. They must first buy into what you want to do before you can come up with an environmental policy for a company. You can't, if without the buy-in of the top management, you cannot implement an environmental policy. The same thing applies to an EMS, an environmental management system. You cannot implement an environmental management system for an organization without the buy-in of the top hierarchy of the management. And so the starting point really is to have their buy-in to it. If you have their buy-in to it, they are likely going to support the implementation. The truth is that having interacted with some of our colleagues who work in private organizations, I have a friend in Dangote in those days who was heading their whatever, what is it called now, environment sector. He will always complain that, you know, they see them as the one just spending money. They are just spending money, just bring bills. They want them to pay for this, do this. They are just, so they see environment compliance with environmental requirements as more of just making us to spend money. And it is like that because they feel like that because they probably have not been thoroughly educated about the importance, you know. So the first stage is to have their buy-in to it. Once they buy into that policy, naturally one should expect that they should support the funding of the implementation, all things being equal. All things being equal. But if we now have a challenge where they are not supporting the implementation, that means that what they just wanted to have was just a document to show in case the regulators come to show. There's nothing much you can do. Once you are a staff there, except you don't want to keep your job, you can only persuade, You can only look for opportunity to educate. And beyond that, there's nothing else you can do because you don't have the approval powers. So that is just it. And is actually an issue, particularly with private sector organizations who don't have environmental stewardship as their goal. And it happens in this climate because most times people buy products without checking out environmental performance of organizations. In other climes where your environmental performance is being critically looked at in even buying your product or relating with your company, they won't take it for granted. But it is what it is. Thank you.
Okay, another question. We hope to round up by 6:30 or before the hour. How possible and convenient will it be for state agencies to implement federal policy on environmental matters?
How possible and convenient?
Yeah.
It's possible if the states were part of the process of formulation, like I've said before. It is very possible. It is true that environmental issues are not on an exclusive list. They are not. But when you have a good policy, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. If there's a good federal policy that the state is a part of, and the state was part of the process, nothing stopped the states from implementing. The only thing that is required is that the state will now have to localize that policy to reflect their own peculiarities, because all Nigerian states are not the same. All Nigerian states are not the same. As close as Ogun is to Lagos, Ogun and Lagos are not the same in terms of their climate, their peculiarities. As close as Ogun is to Lagos. Not to talk about Lagos to Sokoto. So it is left for the states to adopt those policies, localize them, considering their own peculiarities. So it is very possible where we choose to work together in overriding interest of the environment. It becomes difficult when we want to work in silos. And states do resist federal policies because sometimes those federal policies were done without involving the states, and the states felt that considerations were not given to what is germane to them. I, Sojinu, have had to walk out of a meeting with some other states before on an issue. I went to represent Lagos State at a federal meeting, and we felt that everything was just about, we just were brought to come and probably just say yes, sir. And I felt, no, that is not what I came for. I came to represent Lagos State government, and I feel that my concerns as a state should be addressed. So you have such occurrences if people felt they are not being carried along. But where people are carried along, their interests are captured, of course. Maybe we go for, what is it called? We have a National Council on Environment, which is the highest decision-making body on environmental issues in Nigeria. And decisions are made, and everybody complies. So if it can happen at that level, then it can happen even on policy matters from federal to state. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Another question: what are the biggest challenges Lagos faces in balancing economic development with environmental sustainability, and what policies can address them? How can Lagos leverage its waterways for eco-friendly transportation to reduce traffic congestion and carbon emission? So how can Lagos balance economic development with environmental sustainability? What are likely policies that government can use to do that? Thank you.
Well, Lagos, of course, as of today, and we are proud to say it, we're proud to say that Lagos remains the preferred destination for businesses in Nigeria today. We still remain the preferred destination for many businesses across various sectors. And that preference is not because we are Lagos, but because the Lagos state government over time have created both infrastructure and enabling environment to allow businesses to thrive. And so that, yes, the issue of economic development is a direction for us. However, the state government also through various environmental policies is also ensuring that we strike the very delicate balance between our desire and aspiration for economic prosperity and environmental protection. And various instruments are being used. The Environmental Protection and Management Law 2017 is an instrument. There are guidelines and regulations by various agencies of government. As a matter of fact, Lagos State probably is the only state that have under the environment sector at least 8 agencies. 8, all in the name of protecting the environment. So that gives you an idea that while we pursue economic prosperity as a state, we are also determined to ensure we strike the balance when it comes to environmental protection. And one critical instrument also being used is the Environmental Impact Assessment Instrument. It is an instrument being used to ensure that development projects are being implemented in an environmentally and socially sustainable manner. That is one instrument that is being used, apart from using the instrument of existing agencies and their functions and mandates. So I'm not sure if you tell us about what other policies it's already been done. It's already been done. So that's that. About water transportation, if I get the question very well, Mr. Lazi, how can Lagos State?
Yeah. How can we maximize the waterways? It's just a transport related issues. Which the state is already doing now.
I think the answer is very clear. The state is already taking advantage of the waterways. There are jetties and ferries are being bought on a daily basis. We even went to the extent of establishing a whole agency to manage water transportation in Lagos State. I think that already speaks to itself. Though it is not yet Uhuru, more can still be done. So I am not an expert in water transportation. I can only say what I know so far. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. While we wait for Madam Sheyi to help us with the vote of thanks, we have 2 questions, but they are related. So I will rush through that, just answer that without bothering Doctor on that. The first one is on styrofoam ban and single-use policy in the state. Yes, the state is about coming up with not only a policy, there's likely to be a law. There's likely to be a law that will help to address that. Also, somebody raised an issue that has to do with the charges on nylon from ShopRite. No, it is not the state government that is collecting the fee. It is each of the supermarket that are collecting the fee themselves. So this is just to discourage people from buying or from using it. So you are expected to come with your shopper's bag to the shopping mall. So that is why each of the supermarkets is putting a particular charge on it. The charge is not from the state government. Okay, how much is Lagos doing to shift from command and control by using buying intervention of policy? Yeah, the state government is already doing that. In the past 4 years, the state government, even before preparing the budget, there's always a town hall meeting that is being done by Lagos State government, where policy directions, any project that will be done in community, Lagos State government always have the buy-in of the citizen. So can we have a brief on ESG? Yes, we are going to have a whole day section for ESG in May. The Lagos Environment Lecture Series for May 1st will be on ESG. And we are going to have a panel discussion. We are going to have a guest lecturer who is going to speak on ESG. Is there any environmental policy or monitoring of facility in the free trade zone that hinders under federal, only NESTRA can monitor? No. We've always mentioned this several times that the free trade zone, yes, it's a free trade zone, but that does not exclude the state and the local government from monitoring the free trade zone. Do the proper due diligence, write to the agency that is in charge, seek their collaboration. If they want to join us to monitor the place, it's okay. No federal agency has the right to stop any government agency from carrying out its duty and responsibility. I think we've done that. Before we close and before we do the vote of thanks, the next lecture series, we are starting a new program here where we want to start sharing experience from different states. Today on the call, we have our colleague from Ogun State, from Ondo State, from Kano State. We have people from River State who join us today. So the next lecture series, we are having the Director of Climate Change from Ministry of Environment and Climate Change in Kano State. Dr. Uma will be lecturing us on the role of non-state actors in climate change governance in Nigeria. That will be our next lecture series. It will come from the Director in charge of climate change in Kano State. And thereafter, we'll have another lecture from a director in Ogun State. So we want to make it where we can share experience from federal and state government agencies. So we'll start reaching out to our colleagues in other states. Let's learn from each other. So and that's immediately we have the date, we'll circulate it. We have our email, we'll mail this to us. Doctor, people are requesting for the slide. We want to seek the permission if you make the slide available for us.
Okay, the slide will be available. I will make it available to you. But let me quickly seize this opportunity to greet my former PAMSEC who is on call with us tonight, Mrs. Aderonke Belinda Odeneye, my one and only PAMSEC. I greet you, ma. I recognize you. I see you on this call. I greet you, ma. It's an honor to have you here.
Thank you. Good evening. Well done.
Yes, ma.
Keep the flag flying.
Thank you very much for joining us, ma. I didn't even look at it.
All right. Continue to keep the flag flying. Well done. We're blessed with the lecture, and we trust that greater height is your portion.
Thank you, ma. Thank you, ma.
Thank you.
So, Eco-Environment, thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, sir. So, thank you, everybody. Madam Shea, it's up to you. And Fatima, you can do the closing.
Thank you, Mr. Lasisi. On behalf of all the participants and the Eco-Environment Talk team, I'd like to say a very big thank you to Dr. Sojunu. This was an insightful and engaging session. It was indeed impactful. Your depth of knowledge, practical insights has truly enriched our understanding in the landscape of environmental policies. So we want to say a very big thank you to you, sir. And we know time is money, and thank you for your time too as well. Thank you very, very much. God will continue to bless you in the mighty name of Jesus.
Amen. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, everyone, for staying with us to the very end. We will see you in the next session. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the weekend. Good night. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
ẹ̀wù ọlọ́pọ̀ ṣàlùwà ó reflect.